Good day, everyone. Our study is entitled Examining Kaginhawaang Pansambayanan through the lens of Diwa-Kapwa-Loob, the case of Concepcion Industrial Corporation. At its core, this study asks a simple question. How do Filipino values shape stakeholder engagement and contribute to shared prosperity? The concept of shared prosperity has been increasingly important in global development discussions. However, many existing frameworks remain rooted in Western assumptions about organizations and stakeholder relationships. Take Freeman's and Mitchell et al.'s stakeholder theory, for example. It emphasizes the identification, management, and prioritization of stakeholders. And while these frameworks are useful, they do not fully explain how relationships are understood and practiced in the Philippine context. To address this gap, we draw from Enrique's Psikolohiya Filipino, which argues that Filipino experiences should be understood through indigenous concepts rather than imported frameworks. Specifically, we examine three key Filipino concepts: Diwa, Kapwa, and Loob, which together form the DKL framework. Our study was guided by two research questions. First, how do Diwa, Kapwa, and Loob manifest in stakeholder management practices? Second, how do these practices contribute to both internal and external well-being, which we conceptualize as Kaginhawaang Pansambayanan, or shared prosperity? To answer these questions, we used a qualitative single case study design focused on Concepcion Industrial Corporation. Data were collected through pakikipagkwentuhan, or storytelling interviews, with 8 managers and employees across different business units. We also analyzed the company's annual reports to triangulate the findings. So our findings suggest that stakeholder engagement is not simply a managerial process. Instead, it is shaped by a dynamic interaction between Loob, Kapwa, and Diwa. Beginning with Loob, in Psikolohiyang Filipino, Loob refers to the holistic inner self. In our findings, Loob was expressed through 3 dimensions: kusang-loob, buo ang loob, at pagkakaloob. So kusang-loob refers to voluntary initiative. Employees consistently describe going beyond formal job requirements because they personally believe in the value of what they were doing. For example, employees voluntarily participated in CSR initiatives and community programs not because they were required to do so, but because they found meaning in contributing to others. Buo ang loob refers to courage and integrity. So one manager described experiencing burnout and needing time away from work. So rather than treating this as a weakness, the organization provided support and psychological safety, demonstrating how leadership can protect the well-being of its stakeholders. Finally, pagkakaloob refers to sharing and entrusting of resources. This was evident in programs such as its Aling Tindera initiative, where plastic recovery efforts created livelihood opportunities for women entrepreneurs in underserved communities. These examples show that stakeholder engagement begins with an individual's inner values and voluntary commitment rather than just mere compliance. Kapwa is often the second major finding centers on Kapwa, which is Kapwa is often translated as shared identity. So rather than seeing stakeholders as separate entities, Kapwa expands that boundary of the self to include others as hindi ibang-tao, or one of us. Interestingly, our findings reveal 2 different expressions of Kapwa within the organization. While some participants describe their workplace as a family, emphasizing care, emotional support, and belongingness, others preferred the language of a professional team, emphasizing competence, accountability, and mutual respect. And although these approaches appear different, both reflected the same underlying principle, which is stakeholders were treated with dignity and humanity. This was especially evident in how the company treated outsourced workers, community partners, and even students participating in educational programs. Rather than being viewed as external beneficiaries, they were treated as valued members of a broader community. Among all the DKL components, Kapwa showed the strongest relationship with internal well-being, suggesting that prosperity in Filipino organizations is fundamentally relational. Moving on to the third finding, which concerns Diwa. Diwa refers to collective consciousness or shared spirit. participants consistently described a sense that their work was connected to a larger purpose. This collective purpose was reflected in the organization's advocacy programs related to education, entrepreneurship, environmental sustainability, and community development. We also found that Diwa operates through what Psikologiyang Filipino describes as qualitative, or relational sensing. Leaders did not rely solely on formal survey or metrics. Instead, they actively engaged with employees, observed team dynamics, and responded to emerging concerns through personal interaction and pakiramdam. This demonstrates how Diwa aligns individual actions with collective goals and sustains long-term engagement. When Loob, Kapwa, and Diwa interact, they produce two forms of well-being. The first is Ginhawang Panloob, or internal well-being, which includes psychological safety, fulfillment, meaning, and emotional balance. While the second is Ginhawang Panlabas, or external well-being, which includes material security, livelihood opportunities, educational support, and community development. Together, these forms of well-being create Kaginhawaang Pansambayanan, or shared prosperity. So one of the most significant insights of our study is that organizational processes alone do not automatically create prosperity. Stakeholder management only produces meaningful outcomes when it is mediated by indigenous values such as the Diwa-Kapwa-Loob and Loob. Theoretically, our study contributes that DKL framework as a culturally grounded extension of stakeholder theory. So rather than replacing existing frameworks, it demonstrates how indigenous Filipino values provide a richer understanding of stakeholder relationships and organizational well-being. Practically, our findings suggest that organizations should move beyond treating employees' welfare and community engagement as separate functions. Instead, they should cultivate what we describe as a unified moral ecosystem, where internal well-being and external impact reinforces one another. This is particularly relevant to SDG 3 on good health and well-being, SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth, as well as SDG 10 on reduced inequalities. Finally, we acknowledge an important limitation. As a single case study, the findings cannot be generalized to all organizations. Future research may examine other industries and organizational contexts to further validate and refine the DKL framework. In conclusion, our study demonstrates that shared prosperity in Filipino organizations is not simply an economic outcome. Rather, it emerges from an interaction of Diwa, Kapwa, and Loob, which together create both internal and external well-being. And by grounding stakeholder management in indigenous Filipino values, organizations can foster more inclusive, more sustainable, and meaningful forms of development. And that's it for our research. Thank you very much.